Jetzt. Ich weiß nicht. Normalerweise finde ich so blinkende Knöpfe auch immer total cool, aber ich kann mich beherrschen.
Okay. Na, dann können wir gerne starten.
Ja? Gut. Good to go? All right, excellent. So, welcome everybody. Former student Austria TechTalk. My name is Matthias Feldmann. I'm here on behalf of INNIO Jembacher and about to present a tech talk on driving green energy forward. And what that all means we'll talk about here in a second. So from a content perspective, what do I want to convey today? What do I want to talk about? First of all, I want to give you a little bit of a background on who is INNIO Jembacher and who are we? Maybe a potential employer for you in the future, who knows? And then I've structured my talk a little bit about the challenge that we're facing and that we're trying to address via e-fuels, for instance, and the utilization of e-fuels, especially in the role of power generation. So if you want to hear a talk about utilizing e-fuels in mobile applications, then this is the wrong talk for you. We'll be talking about large engines, big power, and large power generation systems. I'll talk a little bit about the roadmap, the journey that we're on, and where this might take us. And just before we get into some project examples, I will also give a little bit of an insight on ammonia, and trying to answer if ammonia maybe is the better hydrogen. So let's take a look. So who are we? INNIO Jembacher. INNIO Jembacher really consists of three brands, basically. We got Jembacher gas engines, which Jembacher is headquartered in Jenbach in the Inntal, in beautiful Tyrol, just south of Aachen Lake. We got Waukesha, which is our US brand for large gas engines, mainly in oil and gas compression applications. And then we got My Plant, which is our digital platform and digital applications, which is really there to support our customers in operating their applications or their CHP applications or gas compression units, whatever it is that they're using, by providing digital services. So located with our headquarters in the heart of Tyrol, we have about 1,500 to 2,000 employees right there, and we fabricate all of the Jembacher engines right there. And talking of Jembacher engines, what are we talking about? I said large power generation, and this is the product portfolio basically that you see here that we manufacture in Tyrol. So the smallest engine that we do has right about 200 kilowatts of electrical power output, and we go via our platforms all the way up to plus 10 megawatt of electrical power output. So type 2, 3, 4, 6, and 9, where the numbers refer to the displacement per cylinder in liters. So that's where the numbering or where the labeling comes into place, and you can see we span from few hundred kilowatts to 10 megawatts in electric power output.
Is this peak power or is this constant power?
This is constant power. So if we talk about stationary power generation, then we talk about operating at 90% of rated power plus continuously, right? So either there's a demand for electricity and then the unit is being turned on and it takes whatever gas there is and turns it into electrical energy and heat, and typically you do that at the highest output because that's where the efficiency is the highest.
What's the downtime of the machines?
It depends on the application. Classical CHP applications in the past, so CHP being combined heat and power, where we provide electricity and process heat. In the almost old days, I would say we had 95% availability and continuous operation of the asset. Things are changing a bit more now with more and more renewables coming into play. We have more volatility in the grid, and we see there's more and more demand for peaking applications. So what's peaking applications? Peaking applications is basically whenever there's insufficient supply from renewables, you need to supply the demand, so then you would turn on these assets. They would run for a few hours, maybe only half an hour to stabilize the grid, and then turn off again. So we see a transition from basically continuous full load operation to more and more peaking, which is more frequent starting and shorter full-time operation. That's also driven by the energy transition and energy mix we're in. We will talk a bit more about that in detail throughout the talk. Now, maybe one thing to add. Obviously, for these engines, obviously, for INNIO GmbH, all of these engines are gas engines. Biggest business is natural gas, no questions asked there, but you can also get these units for biogas and also for special gas applications, wood gas, syngas, then from wastewater treatment, typically you got gases that you can use, landfill gases. So I tend to say whenever you have a gas that is combustible, we will find a way to burn it in the engine to provide heat and power to power your world accordingly. So for all of those that are looking in picking up a job in the near future, or maybe even an internship, check out our website. We're located in beautiful Tyrol. There's also plenty of free time activities possible next to an exciting job. And if you want to get your hands dirty with some big iron and some large engines, then this is definitely the place to be in Austria, if not in the entire world. All right, but let's take a look at moving green energy forward and the core of my talk here and what this is all about. So in 2020, we had about 27,000 terawatt hours of renewable energy in the grid. So that's 22%. By 2050, that number will increase significantly, and you will go to a much larger number in terms of, or percentage of renewable energy being present in the grid, which is good, right? I don't need to tell anybody about global warming, CO2 emissions, and how we need to reduce, and this being one of the biggest challenges that we face. So more renewables is a absolutely good thing, but there do come some challenges with it, and we already slightly touched on it, and we said in terms of an electrical grid, we need to satisfy the demand instantaneously. So the grid cannot store electricity. We need to provide the electricity at the right amount, at the right time, as it is being consumed. And that brings me to maybe a little bit of a provoking slide. Where you could say, well, blackouts are totally yesterday. We have a super stable grid and everything is fine. I could turn this around and pose the question like, is this really going to be the case in the future as we have more volatility due to PV and wind, because there's a dependency now on the sun shining or the wind blowing, and if there's a cloud that goes in front of the sun, then your PV is dropping, and that needs to be filled in somehow, some way. If you don't do that, then the grid is going to collapse, basically. Now, I don't think that is a very likely scenario that we will have shortages in power supply or that we get a big unstable instability in the grid, because there's something that we can do about it, and we'll talk about that in a second here, what can be done in that area. But before we get into that, basically I brought here a real-life example, and if you've been with the talk last year, then we spent a whole lot of time on this slide, taking a look at what's actually happening here. This time I just want to quickly use it to get you the insights and the key message here, right? So we're looking at the electricity being generated in the German net, which was in a week of April in 2023. You can see by the different columns, renewables, and the other sources like nuclear, hydro, etc. And in gray is the demand. So crossed out here is fossil fuels, because obviously with the energy transition and decarbonization, we no longer want that. So if you erase that from the sheet, then there is a gap that needs to be filled. On the left side of the slide, this would have been perfectly fine because we actually in total had an excess of electricity available, which led to an export of electricity outside of Germany. But towards the end of the week, that would have been a problem. Not completely on coincidence. I chose the week where also Germany decided to exit nuclear power, which is why you see that the red bar is disappearing here towards the end of the week. Now, I don't want to make this a talk about nuclear power, but the key message is here, at the end of the week, there was significantly less production in renewables because of weather conditions not being favorable. However, demand was about the same, and here we had at the time to fill in with fossil fuels and to import electricity from the neighboring countries with the electrical grid we have throughout Europe, which is perfectly fine. The grid across Europe is a great deal or a great help to balance in between the individual countries. But the key here is, if you take a look at the surplus that we had at the beginning of the week, and if we would have been able to store these roughly 350 gigawatt hours at an efficiency of about 88%, we could have avoided any imports towards the end of the week. So key message that I want to convey with this slide is, as you have volatility in wind and PV, you need to have some ability to either quickly get electricity from hydropower, but we're limited with hydropower due to geological reasons. You can't just build hydropower plants everywhere and dams everywhere. Or we need to find a way to take electricity that is a surplus when the wind is blowing and the sun is shining, and store it somehow so that we can use it when we have not so favorable weather conditions. And there's various forms of energy storage. Obviously, fossil fuels would be one of them, but we don't want those. So then the next best thing you might think of as a Formula student a member here is a battery, as you're using that in electric vehicles. But there comes an issue with batteries because the amount of batteries you would need to store the electricity is just not feasible. And also, if we talk long-term storage, here the example was just 1 week, but if we think about seasonal storage, so we have plenty of sun in the summer, not so much in the winter. There we have a little bit more wind, but it's not quite that it would all balance out, right? So if we could store and shift energy from the summer to the winter, that would be great. But then we're talking about the long-term storage on the scale here, which is basically at the very top of several months. And also the amount that we were talking about was in the range of several hundred gigawatt hours. So then the only thing that is left here which is feasible is chemical bound energy. So we would need to take the electrons and turn them into green molecules of some fashion, which can be stored, and then later on we can turn them back into electricity, or electricity and heat, that is. So how do we do that among all of these technologies? Let's take a look at the e-fuels, because obviously that's the most interesting part, at least for us. And it all starts with the renewable energy sources, where you can directly use them in the electrical power grid, which is fine. I'm a big fan also of e-mobility, so don't get me wrong, anything that is light passenger vehicles for daily commuting, perfect application for e-mobility. Heating in our houses with heat pumps, also great application for electricity there. But if we want to start storing it, then basically we can take electricity, water, run it via an electrolyzer. We will get some heat out of it, which we can nicely combine with the heating pump or heat pump to provide heat. And we also will get H2 as the chemical that has the stored energy in it. There will also be some oxygen, which you may or may not be able to use depending on where you are in the world and what applications are around you. And with that hydrogen, you arrive at the simplest e-fuel basically that you can derive from electricity. Now this can be used directly. We can store it, we can turn it into an H2 power plant, like the engines that we basically produce, and turn it back into electricity at some point in time. You can use it in furnace applications directly or in the industry. You can also use it for fueling stations with fuel cell vehicles, for instance. But you can also go ahead, and that's the second part of the talk, is about ammonia. We can further process it under the addition of nitrogen, which is surrounding us at about 79% in the atmospheric air. So go through an air separation process, you arrive at nitrogen. In the Haber-Bosch synthesis, you can combine those two and you arrive at ammonia, which is NH3. We'll talk about the advantages and disadvantages of that in a second. Or obviously towards the bottom end of the chart, you can also have, if you have a source of CO2 that hopefully is really CO2 neutral or renewable CO2, then you can combine the hydrogen with the CO2 to arrive at even longer hydrocarbon chains like methane, methanol, or even synthetic gasoline and diesel fuels. Now, if I talk about e-fuels, then I talk about hydrogen, ammonia, and methanol. Methane is a special case. You can synthesize methane, e-methane, but that's not a big challenge for us because natural gas consists of 90+% methane. So it doesn't matter if it's natural gas or if it's an e-methane. We can work with that anyways. From an R&D perspective, hydrogen, ammonia, and methanol are the three key fuels that we care about at INNIO. Now, why all the hassle, you might ask? Well, there's one very important thing when it comes to storage and transport of these fuels. One is hydrogen being the easiest to produce, therefore it's most cost effective, but it has the least energy density. So it's very difficult to store and therefore not very attractive, but it's the cheapest among those. Any additional synthesis is costing money, obviously, and also it's an additional step in the process which comes with efficiency, so there's some loss of energy in the process, which is typically heat that is being produced and that can be used. So therefore, if you go down the chain here, basically it's going to get more costly for these fuels, but the energy density is going up, which makes it very interesting for these fuels from a storage and transportation perspective. So, hydrogen, ammonia, and methanol being the fuels that we're looking at. Let's quickly take a look at what we have accomplished so far already at INNIO. We're basically done with our product lineup for the category A on the left-hand side, which is blending hydrogen with natural gas. So up to 5%, you don't have to modify anything on the engine. 25% blending, there's a little bit of modification needed, but that's also done deal. You can get that on any of the product. This development is taken care of. From our past applications in the special gas world, we are able to burn mixtures with up to 60%. So any wood gas or synthesis gas typically has those high H2 concentrations where we also have product available. The really interesting part is then over here on the right-hand side with this category, we call it B2 or even C. B2 would be a dual fuel engine. You can run it either on natural gas or on 100% hydrogen. And then category C would be a 100% by volume hydrogen engine that we also have available in our product portfolio. Now, we've done the judging this morning on the INNIO Hydrogen Challenge, and we're talking about fuel properties and how they impact engine design or utilization, etc. Now, this is not going to be a quiz, so don't worry, you don't have to memorize all those numbers, but there's a few things that I want to point out that we also discussed this morning. Basically, we found that fuel tanks for hydrogen are very big on the Formula Student race cars, and that is because hydrogen, if it's in its gaseous phase stored, has a very low energy density. So that's driving the need for large fuel tanks, and that's obviously a problem if you think about mobile applications where you need to move the hydrogen with the machine. Same as in the Formula Student car, you end up with very big tanks that you don't know where to put them and how to handle that. Things get better if you liquefy, but liquefy always means that you got some boil off, and that's a certain challenge. Ammonia, on the other hand, is superior over hydrogen with respect to the energy density. You can liquefy it at just 10 bars of pressure and ambient temperature, very much like LPG gas. And in its liquid state, it even has more energy per unit volume than liquefied hydrogen. So I guess if we want to spoil the end of the talk with ammonia being the better hydrogen, there would be a strong argument from a transportation and storage perspective that this was the case. Now, in contrast to the challenges that we have with hydrogen on combustion and the beauty with ammonia, things reverse if we take a look at combustibility. Hydrogen is a superior fuel, very wide ignition window, forms combustible mixtures in air at a very wide range, easily ignitable, which obviously puts out some fear about this being a very dangerous fuel. But I can assure you that if you take account of the physical properties and you take the appropriate measures like you would do on a natural gas engine as well, then this can be handled. This is not any more dangerous than natural gas if the appropriate measures are in place. Ammonia, on the other hand, is a horrible fuel. In fact, there is research going on right now that says ammonia is not combustible. It is the presence of an ignition source that then the ammonia starts decomposing, and the hydrogen that's then present, that will combust, and due to the heat that's being released, additional ammonia will decompose, but the NH3 itself is not combustible. Yet, we can use it as a fuel in an engine. It's just got to be a little bit harder to ignite it and make sure that the engine is operating. So that's the drawback of ammonia. It's also toxic, so that's not very good. The good news there is that you will smell it a long time before it's getting toxic, and you will naturally escape the ammonia cloud because you can smell it, and it's such an intense smell, it will scare you away. So for both fuels we have to do something. Hydrogen, we basically have to slow down the combustion process. We have to think about measures that we can slow down the combustion process, make it more like natural gas to use it in our engines. For ammonia, on the other hand, we got to speed up things. We got to tell ammonia or teach ammonia to quickly burn, otherwise this is not going to work. Just quickly to complete the picture here, there's much talk in the industry about 25% H2 admixing into the natural gas grid. While I think this is a good step in the right direction, and it comes with little challenges that can be addressed, the biggest drawback is this is H2 by volume, not on an energy level. So if you think of CO2 reduction, then 20% of H2 by volume will actually get you only about 8% CO2 reduction because of the vast difference in density of the hydrogen and the natural gas. So definitely a right step in the right direction, but we can't stop there. We got to take this serious. We got to work on the 100% H2 solution in order to fully decarbonize the system and make it work. So making it work. I talked about hydrogen being a very quickly, very fast burning fuel, and some of the teams in the Hydrogen Challenge did see that and accounted for that when using it in an IC engine. And we saw different technologies being applied in order to deal with that. For the case of 25% admixing in our products, we also see that the addition of hydrogen, even at those lower concentrations, is accelerating the combustion process. And we need to do something in order to maintain the high peak or the peak pressure, and also to make sure that we do not get any increase in NOx emissions. In order to do that, we have fitted our engines with a special software and an H2 sensor, where we basically sense the amount of H2 that's present in the fuel, and then a special compensation algorithm is working to adjust air-fuel ratio and spark timing so that we maintain the same emission level, we maintain the same stress on the unit as if there was no hydrogen present. Fairly easy setup, can be retrofitted at any time to our product, and basically enables you to burn up to 25% hydrogen. Yes, please.
Where do you measure the H2 content? Is it like in the intake?
In the fuel line. In the fuel line. We measure it in the fuel line. Yes. Because in the intake, you would already have air mixed into it.
Yeah.
So we measure in the fuel line, and there we get the H2 reading of the H2 concentration in the fuel, and that's the input to our compensation software. We could also get an external signal, so we can avoid our own sensor if the content is known. Then that can be provided from external, and our ECU can also work with that. But that's 25%. Okay, so let's talk about the fun stuff, right? The 100%. because this is where the rubber meets the road, and this is where the fun really starts, in my opinion at least, right? Because things get a whole lot more challenging. But we figured it out for our Type 4 product. So what do we do? I brought a sectional view here. Type 4 engine on the left is our conventional natural gas product. This is operating pre-mixed. So pre-mixed means we introduce the natural gas with the air in front of the turbo. Both is getting compressed, then there's an aftercooler in place, and then we feed it to the individual cylinders. For hydrogen we don't do that, because the large volume that we have present there is, if that would ignite, then there's a large amount of energy being released. So therefore our Type 4 engine has port fuel injection valves, you can see them right here, which are fitted to the individual cylinders, also including some advanced cylinder pressure sensing and engine controls, which enables us effectively on this engine to burn both hydrogen at 100%, natural gas at 100%, or anything in between, because we can blend on the engine natural gas and hydrogen per the customer requirement basically. So there's a lot of more work that went into it. Obviously from a combustion perspective, compression ratio, valve timing, things have been optimized to find a happy medium in between natural gas and H2. Also on the lube oil, there is a lot of things that need to be done, because lube oil is naturally combusting and forming deposits in the combustion chamber. These might act as an ignition source, and then you get into abnormal combustion events which are really harsh on the engine and which clearly need to be avoided. So we use special lube oil with a special formulation to address that topic, and also the advanced controls help identify pre-ignitions and mitigate them accordingly, so that we can handle the abnormal combustion events accordingly. And that's one of the biggest challenges with this lean burn application. But it's there, and you can buy it basically for our 412, 16 and 20 cylinder engine, and with that we can serve anywhere in between 600 kW and about a megawatt in electrical power output. So if we take a look then at our complete product portfolio, I told you 25% was no big deal. That's easy with the H2 sensor and compensation software. 100% with the lean burn we have demonstrated here on Type 4. That's checked off. So what do we do now? What's next, you may ask? Well, what we're doing right now is we're working for 2025 on our Type 6 engine. So we're stepping it up a notch, going to a higher power output. And if you've watched really careful, then you might see here that the natural gas power output that's been depicted here for the Type 4 is actually higher compared to the Type 4 100% H2 engine. So the 100% H2 engine has a D rating compared to its natural gas version, because the technology and the development that we've been doing there is not as advanced as what we do on the Type 6 engine. So for Type 6, what we'll be looking at there is basically full power, and as compared to the natural gas engine, and similar transient response also for that product, so that virtually there's no difference in between natural gas and H2 anymore. So that's the outlook. Type 4 done, Type 6 is coming up next, and after that we'll work on Type 9, where we take a close look though, because the availability of hydrogen in market is basically providing the business opportunity, and based on that we pace ourselves with the development of the Type 9, but the advanced system we've developed for Type 6, there's no doubt in my mind that this will also work on Type 9 to get also a very high power output there at the same transient response that we have basically today with the Type 9 engine. So let's take a quick look at how does this look when we work with hydrogen. In the old days, I can almost say we did bring in tube trailers like this one that have the hydrogen stored inside, and we have two walls to the left and right, which is basically a shield protection in the case there was any fire, that we don't set anything on fire that's next to the trailer. And then there's a tableau, a pressure tableau basically, where we hand the hydrogen over to an underground pipe system that is distributing it to our test benches. And then that's a picture of a test bench where you have the gas regulation unit. Very similar actually to what's been presented in the hydrogen challenge today in terms of shut-off valves and pressure regulation system. Same deal here, just a bit bigger, basically from a setup, which enabled us to do the appropriate research. But things are changing. We have at our factory, which is depicted right here in the beautiful Intal, we have power sources from a PV, for instance. We also have a small water power plant. And what we're taking a look at is in the energy landscape, not just the engine, but all of the energy sources that are available to us. Now in our case, for INNIO, that's our small water turbine, and that's also PV. Obviously we have a grid connection also, but what we're also doing is we have a cooperation with T-Next, where right over here in the corner is the Aachen-See Kraftwerk, which is a hydropower plant, and also a PV field's been installed there. And that's where we are setting up an electrolyzer right now, which then will deliver or produce hydrogen, store the hydrogen, and then we will deliver it via pipeline past our neighbor's property here, Binderholz, into our facility right about in this area will be the connection where we will produce or get our own produced hydrogen to do the engine testing, which is really key because the nightmare logistics with the trailer come to an end, and we also have much higher quantities available. I mean, you got to think that for a Type 4 engine, for these trailers, we will consume about 1 a day. For Type 6 testing that we have done so far, you go to 2 to 3 of these trailers per day. So that's a challenge, and therefore the system that we're setting up here is quite interesting and actually helping us a lot. We'll be starting with 2 megawatts in electrical power output of the electrolyzers. We can go up to 6. That's what the site is laid out for. We have a 1-ton storage, and then we can discharge in excess of 100 kilogram per hour to the factory. And with the buffer tank, we have the opportunity to decouple. So basically, you run the electrolyzers 24/7, but the engine operation is only on first shift. So the buffer tank is helping you then to get the right fuel quantity that you want at any time. This is what the site's going to look like in the rendering. So we have some administration building infrastructure, PEM electrolyzer right here, then compressor and storage is over here. We also can bring in trailers to consume hydrogen or to also provide hydrogen to external. There's also a hydrogen fueling station, but that's not going to be built because from an application and permission standpoint, that's a nightmare if you want to operate a hydrogen fueling station. So that's not going to be set up, at least not in the first stage. And this is what it looks like as of last month. So you can see that most of the groundbreaking work has been done, completed. We actually expect our actual electrolyzers to arrive here within the next 2 weeks. And then by the end of the year, we will shift gears from construction work to commissioning work. And in Q1 of next year, we should have our own hydrogen flowing to our factory. I talked a little bit about the whole energy ecosystem. So the hydrogen engine being at the heart of it. But we're not limiting ourselves to that. As I said, we have PV and also a water turbine available to us. We also have boilers at the site, and we have 3 large hot water heat storage systems. So now the interesting piece is actually if you take this one step further to take a look from an energy management system perspective at the whole factory and say, like, if I have electrolyzers, if I can store energy chemically in hydrogen, if I got a CHP application running on hydrogen, I can store the hot water also to decouple heat production from electricity demand. Then the question really becomes when should I operate what in order to be least dependent on fossil fuels, least emissions in terms of CO2, biggest independence from the grid. There could be different scenarios. And with the New Energy for Industry, which is a public funded project, or through INNIO, this is funded, this project, we've teamed up with the Austrian Institute of Technology in Wien the Large Engine Center at the University in Graz and Bosch in Hallein to do an advanced development from a fuel injection system to upgrade the engine, but also to understand the whole ecosystem and to come up with an overall optimization algorithm, a microgrid control energy management system to ideally operate our plant, but also to turn this into our My Plant digital solution to help our customers in the future to operate all the different assets that they have such that they have the biggest benefit, whatever that might be. They can define it if it's lowest CO2 emissions or lowest cost. That's up to them. But taking a look at the whole landscape is essential, because then with weather prediction, forecasting, and the storage capacities, this becomes much more effective in an energy solution than just the CHP. So let's wrap it up here quickly with ammonia. We had this table before. I'm not going to talk about it much again. But is ammonia the better hydrogen? Well, two aspects. We talked about advantages in shipping. And the biggest advantage with respect to shipping is obviously we can also import now chemically bound energy from around the world. This is a big advantage because the European Union has a dependency on energy imports by about 50 to 60% of all of the energy that we consume. And we will not get rid of that in the future. So we will rely on energy imports, and ammonia could be a key role here. Now, what did we do in order to burn the ammonia in our engine? As I said, we need to promote it, right? It's not combusting very well on its own. What we do is we use green ammonia from electrolysis of hydrogen and Haber-Bosch. We crack some of it in a catalytic process where we arrive at H2 and N2. We mix that in with the remaining NH3, and then we feed it into the engine to burn it. So the H2 that's within the ammonia is basically promoting the combustion process.
How exactly do you crack it?
I choose not to say. No, I mean, it's a catalytic process. You basically reverse the Haber-Bosch process, right? So you need to provide an activation energy, and with the appropriate catalyst, the ammonia will decompose.
Okay, so at what temperature does this exactly happen?
Depends on the catalyst that you use, but it can be done at the exhaust temperatures that you observe in an engine. So if we talk about 300, 400 degree of exhaust coming out of the engine, if you run the cracker at that, it's enough. Yeah, and we're talking here about a small amount. We talk about up to around, we'll see in the next slide, about 5% in mass throughout the entire cycle that we're needing in terms of it. So let's jump right to that. This is exactly what we're talking about. So excess air ratio, basically your lambda, and then the H2 concentration at the various loads. At part load, we need a little bit more of a combustion promoter, because it's more difficult there to ignite and sustain ammonia combustion. But as we go then to high load, which is essentially the same power output as for natural gas, we can run basically down to 0% H2. Now, you probably wouldn't want to do that because it's getting a bit tricky and not very stable there. So we'd always, with the cracker present, add some H2 to it. But this is an engine that is using ammonia directly in a combustion process with some of the H2 that's derived from the ammonia itself. No secondary fuel. So in marine and shipping, you might often find diesel pilot fuel injections. We don't need any of that. There's no secondary fuel. It comes all back to the ammonia, and it just takes some of it to decompose and promote the combustion process.
Is this your engine supercharged or turbocharged, or is it like?
All of our engines are turbocharged. Typically, I would say we have the 624, so the 24 cylinder, and the Series 9 engine, our largest engines, have two-stage turbocharging. All of the other engines have single-stage turbocharging.
Overboost?
Sorry?
How big is the overboost?
The pressure ratio depends on the application and where we run it, but with the two-stage turbocharging you get pressure ratios of 5 to 6, and for the single-stage turbocharging, depending on the engine size and trim, you might be anywhere in 3 to 4 for pressure ratio.
Okay. What is the impact on this graph? We would have a third axis showing the pressure. Does it have a big impact?
No, you wouldn't see that on the slide, because what this is showing is what's the operating regime, basically for a certain load. What you would see is the manifold pressure will correlate to the load. So indirectly you already have it here, because we have a defined volume in the cylinder. If you want to get more power out of it, obviously more fuel and air needs to get into it, and therefore you need to boost it harder. So you have your boost pressure indirectly with the load on this graph already. But in terms of wide operating window, what helps there is the overall increase in pressure in the combustion cycle and the overall increase in temperature in the combustion cycle. Okay. So let me wrap up with two last examples here that I want to point out. With the Type 4 engine, 100% H2, and North Sea data centers in Eindhoven, Netherlands, we have set up the first data center in the world that is running on a hydrogen backup system. So 6 engines have been provided there to the data center, and we can comply with all of the fast starting requirements and frequency deviation requirements from the data center, so that this data center, even in a backup situation, is running on 100% H2, no CO2 being emitted. And the second very cool project that I like a lot, that I want to point out, is also happening right here in Austria, actually in Upper Austria, Gampan. This is the world's first underground storage for hydrogen. So here you can witness actually exactly what I was talking about in the beginning. PV and wind is being used to do electrolysis, and H2 is being stored underground. So this is long-term storage from summer, shifting energy into the winter. So left-hand side here, summer operation, and then in the winter, there's the H2 is getting out of the ground, and there's a pipeline going to a Type 4 CHP engine, where we turn then the hydrogen back into electricity and heat that the customer can use for their application or to power their application. Really cool project, and I think it takes more of these projects to enable long-term shift of energy. You might argue that a lot of the efficiencies that are in here should actually eliminate the feasibility of this process, because it's so much better to use electricity right away, but storage is the key here. If you are able to store that electricity or that energy for a long period, then the efficiencies become almost irrelevant, because you can actually make or turn a benefit on this while providing much needed electricity and heat at a higher price tag in the winter than producing the hydrogen in the summer.
How efficient is such a well storage?
The storage itself is fairly efficient, because you pump the hydrogen underground, and as it's coming back up, it's the same, right? You have some losses because you need to compress it. So there's some electricity needed to compress it as you pump it underground. The electrolyzer will have about 60% in electrical efficiency, and for our gensets we talk 40 to 43% in electrical efficiency. So if you go from electricity to electricity, there's quite some efficiency losses in between. No questions asked, I don't want to deny those, but the ability to store large amounts for a long time is really the key here for these applications, and I think those will be key to really decarbonize our renewable world and turn this into a zero CO2 economy. With that, I would finish my talk, close it. Thanks for attending. Thanks for the good questions. I'll stick around a bit longer. If you have more questions, we can discuss a bit more. And then I'm sure we'll also have an opportunity to grab a drink or the other and engage in further discussions if you like. Thank you very much for your attention.